quarter acre, roughly the size of 2 tennis courts, can replace almost everything bought at the grocery store. Most people think feeding a family requires 5 acres, 10 acres, maybe 40 to make it work at any meaningful scale. That belief is a lie. The industrial food system constructed specifically so people would keep swiping their cards every week. Families have been feeding themselves on tiny plots for centuries. Not with tractors and bulk orders, but with a plan. A plan is exactly what most people are missing. Not land, not money, not time. A plan that connects every piece together. By the end of this breakdown, you will have the complete blueprint. The animals, the crops, and the layout that covers 90% of food needs. Meat, eggs, dairy, vegetables, even sweetener, all from a quarter acre. And some of these systems cost under $100 to start this week. The average American family spends $1,056 per month on groceries. That is over $12,600 leaving the household every single year. Eggs doubled in price, meat keeps rising, and basic vegetables cost more today than they did just 2 years ago. And for that money, the return is produce sprayed with chemicals, meat pumped with antibiotics, eggs from chickens in total darkness. Most people who try to grow their own food fail, not from laziness, not from lack of commitment, but from following bad advice. They plant a raised bed garden and think that covers it. They buy 6 chickens and find eggs alone do not feed a family. They spread across too many disconnected projects with no system linking them into something that actually produces results. A garden without animals is incomplete. Animals without a garden are expensive, and both without a plan are just draining hobbies. Before supermarkets, before refrigerated trucks, before global supply chains, families fed themselves on small plots of land. Not 50-acre farms. Quarter-acre cottage gardens and backyard smallholdings were the food system that functioned for centuries. In 18th century England, cottage farmers raised families of 6 or more on plots smaller than what most Americans have in their backyard. They ran layered systems. Animals fed the garden fed the animals. Waste from one became input for another. Nothing left the property, nothing needed to be purchased from outside. It was biological engineering, not primitive survival. Medieval monasteries perfected these closed-loop food systems centuries before anyone coined the term permaculture. Rabbits, bees, dense vegetable plots, and dairy animals all within walled gardens smaller than a quarter acre. Feeding communities. During World War II, victory gardens proved the concept again at national scale in a very short period of time. The US government estimated that 40% of all vegetables consumed in America came from backyard gardens on tiny urban lots. This knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because corporations needed customers, not producers. System 1 is the intensive vegetable garden, the foundation that every other piece of the quarter-acre plan builds on. A well-planned intensive garden on just 1,000 square feet produces 400 to 600 pounds of vegetables per year. That is enough to cover a family's fresh produce needs and generate meaningful surplus for preservation through the off-season. The secret to that density is abandoning row gardening with wide paths that waste half the available growing surface. Use raised beds or deep dug beds planted in tight blocks, where every inch of soil is producing something. Succession planting means harvesting one crop and immediately direct seeding the next. No ground sits idle between harvests. Lettuce comes out, beans go in. Beans come out, full greens go in. The cycle continues until frost ends the season. Calorie-dense crops come first. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squash, dry beans, and corn provide the energy a family runs on. Nutrient-dense crops layer in on top. Kale, tomatoes, peppers, and carrots add the vitamins and variety that complete the diet. Vertical growing is the single most overlooked tool available to any small space gardener working with limited ground. Cucumbers, pole beans, and squash trained up trellises double effective growing space without adding a single square foot of land. A 4x8 foot bed with vertical trellises produces what a 4x16 foot flat bed produces when planted correctly. This single system alone can cover 40 to 50% of a family's food when planted with intentional crop selection. But it becomes dramatically more powerful when connected to the animal systems that follow it in this blueprint. System 2 is Quail, the protein powerhouse that fits in a space smaller than a coat closet and requires almost nothing. If only one animal gets added to a quarter-acre food system, quail should be the first and strongest candidate. Nothing else available to a backyard producer comes close to the protein output per square foot that quail delivers. 6 to 8 quail produce 5 to 7 eggs every single day. A consistent daily protein source in a tiny footprint. They mature in 6 weeks, begin laying at 8 weeks, and maintain production for 2 full years without replacement. Quail are quiet enough for neighborhoods where backyard chickens would immediately generate complaints or zoning issues. In most areas, they are classified as game birds rather than poultry, which puts them in a legal gray area that works in their favor. They can be raised on a patio, in a garage corner, or tucked beside the garden shed. Square footage is not a barrier. Startup cost lands under $100 for a basic wire cage, feeder, water bottle, and a bag of bedding material. An $18 bag of game bird feed lasts almost 2 months for 8 birds. Ongoing feed cost is remarkably low. The daily routine for a full quail operation takes about 5 minutes from start to finish, including egg collection. The real magic is the manure. Quail droppings are nitrogen-rich fertilizer that moves straight into the compost system. Animals feed the household. Their waste feeds the soil feeds the vegetables. The loop begins closing here. System 3 is rabbits, the most underrated meat animal available to any American backyard producer right now. One breeding pair produces 50 to 80 pounds of lean white meat per year from the smallest footprint of any common livestock. A single cage requires a space roughly 3 feet by 6 feet, stack cages vertically, and an entire breeding operation fits in a closet footprint. 3 does with 1 buck in stacked housing produce more meat per square foot than any other backyard protein source available. They are silent. Neighbors will have no idea they exist, regardless of how close the housing sits to the property line. Feed costs run $15 to $20 per month for a small breeding operation before garden integration reduces that number significantly. Rabbits eat garden scraps, pulled weeds, comfrey leaves, and leafy greens grown alongside the vegetable production area. Growing rabbit feed alongside vegetables can cut purchased feed costs by half without any additional land or infrastructure. Rabbit manure is cold manure. It goes directly onto garden beds without composting and without burning plant root systems. Packed with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, it functions as premium-free fertilizer delivered on demand every single day. One doe kindles every 30 to 35 days, and offspring reach harvest weight in 8 to 12 weeks on a consistent schedule. No waiting 6 months like cattle, no processing fees, no transportation. Consistent clean protein from the backyard on a predictable cycle. System 4 is honeybees, the invisible multiplier that increases the output of every other system on the quarter acre. Bees do not just produce honey. They amplify every plant on the property that requires pollination to bear fruit. A single hive produces 30 to 60 pounds of honey per year, permanently replacing purchased sweetener for most households. No more buying sugar, honey, or syrup. One grocery line item eliminated completely from the first active season onward. Pollination is the real prize. Studies consistently show pollinated crops produce 30 to 50% more fruit than unpollinated ones. The vegetable garden, the fruit trees, the berry bushes. Bees increase yields across every flowering plant without additional effort. A hive occupies about 3 square feet of ground, and startup costs run $300 to $400 for equipment and a package of bees. After the first year, the ongoing cost is essentially zero. The bees feed themselves from the surrounding landscape for most of the year. Beeswax is a secondary product most people overlook entirely. Candles, lip balm, wood polish, and food wraps from one hive. Weekly maintenance during active season runs about 15 minutes of inspection. Winter maintenance is close to nothing at all. Bees are the lowest maintenance livestock available on a quarter acre and the one with the widest impact on everything else. System 5 is Nigerian dwarf dairy goats. The answer to fresh dairy that most people assume requires acres of dedicated pasture. Nigerian dwarfs stand under 2 feet tall, thrive on limited space, and produce surprisingly impressive daily milk volumes. 2 does give half a gallon to a full gallon of fresh milk every single day at peak production through the lactation period. The milk runs 6 to 10% butterfat compared to 3 to 4% in store-bought dairy, richer, creamier, and better for cheese making. People with standard lactose sensitivity often tolerate Nigerian dwarf goat milk because of the smaller fat globule structure. Think about what that daily milk replaces. Fluid milk, yogurt, cheese, butter, and soft ice cream all come from one source. A household dairy bill of $40 to $60 per month drops to under $15 in feed costs once 2 does are producing consistently. Setup requires basic field fencing for a grazing area, a simple 3-sided shelter, and milking supplies, under $800 total. The daily milking routine takes 10 to 15 minutes per session, less time than a drive to the grocery store for a single item. Goats are browsers, not grazers. They eat weeds, brush, and invasive plants that would otherwise take over the property. They actively clear undesirable growth while producing dairy, land management and food production happening simultaneously. System 6 is perennial food plants, the set-it-and-forget-it layer that produces for years without replanting or annual seed cost. Annual vegetables are powerful, but demand replanting every season. Perennials deliver year after year with minimal ongoing work. 2 dwarf apple trees and 2 dwarf pear trees fit easily on a quarter acre and produce 100 to 200 pounds of fruit annually. Berry bushes planted along fence rows add 5 to 15 pounds per plant every year, without stealing space from primary garden beds. Blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries fill the perimeter and produce heavily with minimal care once established. But the hidden layer of the perennial system is the plants most people never think to include in a food production plan. Comfrey regrows after every cutting and provides free animal feed 4 to 6 times per growing season from a single planting. Asparagus produces reliably for 20 years from a single initial bed preparation, planted once and harvested for 2 decades. Rhubarb, sorrel, and perennial kale return every spring without replanting, seeding, or any seasonal soil preparation. These plants create the backbone of the food system, producing while on vacation, producing through illness, producing without attention. One investment in perennial establishment, decades of food, math the grocery store can never compete with at any price point. The final piece is composting and closed-loop integration, the engine that makes every other system function without outside inputs. Every system built generates waste: quail manure, rabbit droppings, goat bedding, kitchen scraps, and garden trimmings. Whey from cheese making, spent plants from the garden, fruit drops from the orchard. All of it has somewhere to go. Everything enters the compost system and transforms into the fertility that drives every plant on the property. No purchased fertilizer, no bags of amendments from the hardware store. The quarter acre feeds itself from its own outputs. A 3-bin compost system occupies roughly 4 by 12 feet. Bin 1 receives fresh material. Bin 2 actively decomposes. Bin 3 holds. Finished compost ready for garden beds. Rotate weekly, and finished material is ready in 60 to 90 days. A small worm bin positioned under the rabbit cages processes droppings automatically and produces vermicast continuously. Vermicast is the most nutrient-dense soil amendment available, produced for free from the waste stream already running. When animals feed the soil feeds the plants feed the animals, and nothing leaves the property. The loop closes. That is the moment this stops being a collection of separate projects and becomes one integrated food production system. When starting out, the belief that a quarter acre could do anything meaningful simply was not there. The backyard was mostly grass. A family of 4 spending close to $900 a month on groceries and quietly uncomfortable with everything being purchased outside. 8 quail in a wire cage beside the shed was the first experiment. $85 total, set up in an afternoon. Within 2 months, there were more eggs than the household could eat, and neighbors were receiving regular weekly deliveries. That small, tangible win created enough confidence to try the next system. 2 rabbit does and a buck joined the operation. 4 raised beds went in, using rabbit manure as the primary fertility input, with 0 purchased fertilizer or soil amendment. Dwarf fruit trees went along the fence line, then a beehive the following spring, each system connecting directly to the last. Each addition reduced what needed to be purchased, and added another connection in the network of production and fertility. After 18 months, a full quarter of tracking showed grocery spending at $195 per month, down from $900. That is a 78% reduction from a backyard that most people would describe as too small to bother doing anything serious with. Dead plants happened, failed compost batches happened, one rabbit escape became a neighborhood story that is still being told. But the systems matured, the perennials filled in, the animals settled into routines, and the compost started smelling like soil. The morning routine became 45 minutes of collecting eggs, checking rabbits, pulling garden greens, and milking a goat. Almost everything the family eats that day comes from the same quarter acre that used to be mowed grass every weekend. That shift in how food arrives in the kitchen is the change that cannot be measured purely in dollars saved on a grocery receipt. Before beginning, here are the 4 mistakes that wreck most quarter-acre food plans before they ever produce meaningful results. Mistake 1 is starting every system simultaneously out of enthusiasm after seeing what is possible when it all runs together. Quail, rabbits, goats, bees, and a full garden, all launched in the same month, creates a management load that guarantees burnout. Every animal has different housing needs, different feed requirements, and different health signals to learn and recognize. Learning all 5 simultaneously is a reliable path to overwhelm by week 3 and complete abandonment by month 2. Start with one system, master it for 4 to 6 months, let it stabilize and become routine, then add the next. The person running Quail confidently for 1 full season before adding rabbits has more real knowledge than 5 species beginners. Mistake 2 is treating each system as a separate project, with no connection to the others running on the same property. Garden over here, animals over there, compost in the corner, isolated projects instead of one connected food machine. The entire power of a quarter acre comes from integration. Rabbit manure feeds the garden scraps feed the rabbits. Without connecting outputs to inputs intentionally, the result is 5 expensive hobbies rather than 1 efficient food system. Mistake 3 is planting for aesthetics rather than calories. A beautiful bed of lettuce and herbs does not feed a family. Lettuce does not provide the caloric density that actually replaces grocery store trips through the winter months. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, dry beans, and winter squash provide the calories that matter. Grow calories first, variety second. Mistake 4 is producing without any preservation plan for the surplus that will arrive during peak summer production. A quarter acre at full output produces far more than can be consumed fresh during the most productive weeks of the season. Without a system for freezing, canning, dehydrating, or fermenting, that surplus rots and the value disappears completely. A $200 investment in basic preservation equipment turns summer abundance into year-round food security. Without it, nothing stores. Picture the quarter acre 2 years from today with every system running and connected into one producing whole. Quail eggs waiting every morning, rabbits on schedule, dwarf goats at the fence ready for the first milking of the day. Garden beds dark and rich from a year of homemade compost. Fruit trees loaded with a harvest that has nowhere to go but the kitchen. The monthly grocery bill sitting at something like $100 for the items the property cannot produce. Coffee, flour, cooking oil. Everything else comes from the same piece of land that used to require a mower and a gas bill every single week. But the value that goes deeper than money is knowing exactly what is in the food and where every ingredient came from. Not one supply chain disruption, away from empty shelves and panic. The food system is here and renewable every single season. Every system on the quarter acre feeds another system. Animals build the soil, soil grows the food, food feeds the family. Nothing is wasted, nothing is purchased that does not need to be, and the whole system renews itself without outside inputs. That is what real food security looks like. Not a pantry full of canned goods from a warehouse. A living, self-renewing system. Drop a comment naming which system you are starting first. Quail, rabbits, the garden, or maybe something already running. This community grows stronger when real people share real results from real small properties that other people can actually replicate. If this changed how a quarter acre looks as a food production possibility, subscribe and hit the bell for weekly practical content. Your quarter acre is enough. It has always been enough. The only missing piece was a blueprint that connects every part. Deep dug beds prepared once with compost and left undisturbed produce better each year as soil biology develops below. Permanent beds that never get walked on or compacted allow worm populations to build and aeration to improve without tilling. A soil thermometer costs under $10 and tells exactly when soil is warm enough for each crop. Planting on soil temperature beats any calendar. Potato varieties like Kennebec or Yukon Gold, stored in a cool, dark basement, provide staple carbohydrates through winter with zero processing. Dry beans planted in summer and harvested in full store for years and provide protein, alongside meat animals in the food system. Winter squash varieties like butternut or delicata store from October through February on a shelf without any refrigeration. Growing vertical crops against existing fences and walls uses infrastructure already in place with no additional construction cost. A simple drip irrigation system using gravity-fed buckets reduces watering time to minutes and prevents foliar disease from overhead watering. Coturnix quail eggs are 3 to 4 times more nutrient-dense per gram than standard chicken eggs on most measured metrics. The iron, B12, and riboflavin content in quail eggs is significantly higher than in chicken eggs of equivalent volume. Quail that forage through garden beds under supervision consume aphids, fungus gnats, and larvae that would otherwise damage crops. A second generation of quail can be hatched in a small tabletop incubator that costs $40 and holds 50 eggs at once. Hatching replacement birds from the existing flock eliminates the need to purchase new birds after the initial acquisition. Rabbit hides can be tanned at home using basic materials and sold or kept for personal use as a secondary product stream. The organ meat from processed rabbits is exceptionally nutrient-dense and provides vitamins not present in muscle meat alone. Rabbit processing at home takes about 20 minutes per animal with basic tools and produces no waste with the manure system in place. Building stackable rabbit hutches from reclaimed lumber and hardware cloth costs under $50 per unit and lasts many years. Running a vermiculture bin directly under rabbit cages creates a continuous cycle of manure processing into premium castings. Placing a hive near the vegetable garden and fruit tree area creates a consistent pollinator presence throughout the entire flowering period. A Langstroth hive with removable frames is the easiest design for beginning beekeepers to manage and inspect safely. Bee-friendly perennial plantings like borage, phacelia, and lavender extend the forage season for hives beyond typical flowering periods. Raw honey from a home hive has documented antimicrobial properties and serves as a wound dressing in traditional home medicine. Propolis collected from hive frames has potent antifungal properties and can be processed into a tincture for household use. Nigerian dwarf goat milk makes exceptional soft cheeses, including chèvre, ricotta, and paneer, that require no aging period. A basic home cheese press and thermometer costing under $60 opens the ability to produce hard-aged cheeses from goat milk. Goat cheese at farmers markets sells for $8 to $15 per pound. A dairy production surplus generates a meaningful income stream. Breeding Nigerian dwarfs produces kids that sell for $100 to $300 each depending on registration status and bloodline. The whey byproduct from cheesemaking feeds directly to rabbits, chickens, or pigs, closing another output-to-input loop. A single established fig tree can produce 20 to 30 pounds of fruit annually and thrives in containers in colder climates. Hardy kiwi vines take 3 years to begin fruiting and then produce 50 or more pounds per vine for decades afterward. Elderberry bushes serve double duty as insect habitat for beneficial predatory insects that reduce pest pressure in the vegetable garden. Comfrey planted as a ground cover beneath fruit trees acts as a living mulch that suppresses weeds and feeds the tree roots. A no-spray orchard managed with comfrey ground cover and chicken access produces clean fruit without purchased pesticide inputs. The integration point between all systems is time. Stagger animal feeding schedules, so garden scraps move through the system daily. Morning garden harvest generates trimmings that go to rabbits at noon. Rabbit manure goes to compost in the evening. That single daily cycle of material movement keeps every system fed and keeps the compost generating finished material on schedule. Tracking outputs from each system on a simple spreadsheet for one full season reveals which systems return the highest value. Most operators find that rabbits and quail combined replace the most grocery spending per dollar of input of any system available. Year 2 typically shows the perennial layer beginning to contribute meaningfully as bushes and trees enter productive maturity. By year 3, the complete system produces a rhythm that becomes genuinely low maintenance compared to the learning curve of year 1. The quarter acre at full integration in year 3 is producing more food with less daily time than it required in any earlier season. That compounding of productivity over time is the argument for starting now, rather than waiting for more land or a larger budget.